for that thing or the constraints for that particular requirement. So would loan ID be a primary key? See, the main thing is, so loan ID is a primary key. Okay. Now what about customer ID? Because if loan ID is a primary key, then, well, yes, a customer can have multiple loans and a customer ID can basically say that. But what if, okay, so let's have this. So let's say that, but yes, a foreign key, yes, but we also need one more constraint, I think. So let's say that loan ID is a primary key. So L14, L15, let's say, and L16. So these are all primary keys. Those are all different values. That works out. And let's say that L14 is held by C1. That works out. Let's say that L15 is held by C2. That works out. It is still two different loans. And let's see, one loan can be held by a single customer, right? So L14. Yes, I think the uniqueness criteria does not require here. It's the other way around. Exactly. So in this scenario, you are right. So in this scenario, loan ID can be a primary key, and then we can actually enforce that particular constraint. Now, let's say that we have the requirement that there is a one-to-one relationship, right? So one customer can have one loan and one loan can only be held by a single customer. Right. So now on top of loan ID being a primary key, I believe that the customer, if we want to satisfy this, customer ID is still a primary key, I mean a foreign key, but I believe that there should be a unique constraint on the customer ID as well. Right, so that a customer can have a single loan and one loan can only be held by a single customer, right? So just, so does everyone get that? That customer ID now needs to be a unique value as well as being a foreign key, because even though if it's a foreign key, it can still have duplicates, right? So if I say that customer can have a single loan and a single loan can only be held by a single customer, we need to have a unique key. Does everyone agree to this thing, or this new requirement? Check it carefully, let me know. Right. So as you can see, that different constraints result in different requirements, right? And you can see that just by proposing this particular schema to this bank domain expert is not obvious enough to actually showcase that these requirements are being satisfied, or we cannot verify that these requirements are being satisfied if we are not a database designer by trade, right? And also you can imagine that this is quite obvious, but if we have a large enough table with large enough number of attributes, making sure that these sort of constraints are correct and follows the requirements becomes a bit trickier, right? Here we only had two attributes that we were worrying about, but we can imagine that a large enough database or a large enough attribute set would actually result in a bit more complicated sort of scenarios. And it is not obvious as to what should be what, right? What a loan ID should be, what a customer ID should be. And even if it is obvious to us, it is not obvious to the domain expert. So that is why people came up with this new sort of representation, and moving forwards from the relationship model to this new entity relationship model, that is a visual representation of what the database is. But on top of that, it gives you a lot of capabilities in making certain of a certain set of constraints. These type of constraints are a bit more clear. We can specify that this is a one-to-many constraint or many-to-many constraint and so on. That can be represented much clearly in a ER diagram compared to, for example, a straightforward relationship diagram, right? So that is one thing. On top of that, a relationship diagram or a relationship model does not allow certain things to be evident. So what I mean by that is, let's give you guys an example about participation criteria. Okay, so here we know that we have the account ID, account table, and the borrower table, right? So the account, we know that a customer can choose to have loans, right? Note the requirement in my English wording and my specification. A customer can choose to have loans. This is not mandatory. A customer can live his own life without having any loans, right? So that is what we call as participation criteria for different tables. So an entry in one table might not require a corresponding entry in the other table. This is in contrast to, let's say, an employee database that has two tables: employee personal information, employee healthcare information, and so on. That is, so a particular employee with his phone number, email ID, what have you, needs to have their healthcare information, their SSN number as well. Those two things are mandatory, right? This, if we have a value for this particular employee, we also need a personal information for that particular employee. Now, this is a mandatory uh, correlation that is required, a mandatory pair of values that are required. This, on the other hand, this account and borrower relationship are partially mandatory, right? I mean, they are not actually mandatory. A customer can not, it is possible that a customer does not have any loans whatsoever. So is that is that distinguishing thing clear to you? So what is the participation of these tables, right? Are the two things clear? One is one table requires the other table to have data in it. For example, the employee tables would have healthcare information as well, has to have it. The other one is it is not mandatory. So a customer may not have a loan. But is it possible to actually have this sort of a specification represented in our previous relationship model? Can we say anything about how these values participate with each other in terms of the relationship model? Yes, if we chose both of those to be primary keys, blah, 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 it is implied. But it is not glaringly obvious that these participations exist. Does that make sense, what I just said? So there are two types of things that we talked about, right? So one is how can we see the requirements into a better representational model? The other one is there are other things that we need to make it quite obvious, as these values do not need to occur there. It is just optional. And for the other one would be these values are mandatory to be in both of those tables. Does that make sense, what I said? So essentially, that is where your ER diagrams come in. So we will basically be talking about all of the things from the relationship model and the schemas and all of those things. But instead of writing them down in the schema notation, we will learn about how they can be drawn in a visual representation that is called basically a graphical representation for the conceptual schema of what the table should look like. And that is basically called the ER diagram, right? So it is not tough, but essentially it is sort of boring, and this particular set of slides sort of follows the same progress as the book does with ER diagrams, but it is a very easy thing to understand. It is just presented in the book a bit more complicated. But yeah, anyway. So, so whenever we are designing a database, again, we are going to don the hat of a database designer. Given those specifications, how do we convert that into a database representation, right? So whenever we are creating a database, the first thing is what are the functional requirements of your database. So that is how, so what are the functions that are supposed to be supported by your database? Can I add data to it? Can I update to it? Can I delete stuff from it? Things like that. You can imagine the case where, for example, these functional requirements are sometimes quite obvious, right? So let's say that I registered for let's say that I created a new user on Reddit, right? So let's say I created a new user on Reddit, and then after some point, I need to change my email address. Well, Reddit does not allow you to do that quite easily. I don't think Reddit actually allows you to change your email address, right? Same applies for Twitch or Discord, right? You cannot change your user IDs or user names, and you can't even change your email ID. So those are basically your functional requirements. What are the things that I'm allowed to change? What are the things that I'm allowed to update? Am I allowed to add stuff to it? And things like that. So corresponding to these functional requirements, there are also non-functional requirements, right? So it doesn't mean that your database is not functional, but non-functional requirements are related to your scalability and performance of the database. So is it fast? Is it scalable? What is the throughput of the database? How large can this database be? So those would be non-functional requirements. That is something that we are not going to look at in terms of these conceptual schemas. When we design a schema, we are usually not bothered about the physical level storage or the physical level optimizations of the database. We are only bothered about the abstract optimizations of the database and the database design, right? Okay. And so once you have this sort of a diagram, you can then imagine, so you can then basically directly convert that into an implemented relational model or a SQL query that creates the table. If you look online, there are many resources where you can actually upload an ER diagram, and that would actually convert your ER diagram into an actual table schema. So there are many different ways that is possible, and it is basically a formal diagrammatic method to actually represent your database, right? Okay. So why are we focusing so much on the database design process might come as a question. So you can imagine that, let's say that I change my database from a hard drive that was, so let's say that I had my database stored in a